Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is a Ukraine war news update, second part thereof for the 12th of September 2024. Because there was the US presidential debate, I didn't get a chance to put out my geopolitical video. And so I've got like 2 days worth of geopolitics, plus some actually, and also elements of the debate as it pertains to Ukraine. So this is going to be a fairly sizable video. I'm going to rush through a bunch of stuff and maybe not give it. I'm just going to report things and analyze fewer things. So today may also be historic, said Tim White, with a number of VIPs gathering in Kiev. So this was yesterday. Leaders of Lithuania and Latvia hit there, as well as the parliamentary head of Czechia, getting off the train, as well as, and we'll look at this in a second, the Secretary of State for the US, Antony Blinken, and the UK Foreign Secretary, David Lammy. So the last 2 days have been really busy in Kiev. Lithuania, as a result, urged NATO to shoot down Russian drones entering alliance territory. So there's pressure on Romania, Poland, from within those countries, from some people like Radosław Sikorski, the foreign minister for Poland, saying that actually, he seems to be in favour of shooting down drones. So here we've got pressure from Lithuania as a NATO member saying this is NATO territory. The defence minister, he's calling for changes to NATO's air patrol mission in the Baltic states following the recent downing of a Russian military drone in Latvia. So it's happened in Latvia as well, remember. The air patrol should not only monitor, but also, when necessary, speed up NATO's decision-making process so that planes can take off immediately and destroy drones. Now, I don't know. I presume that means the Latvians took down that drone that came into Latvia all the way back up through Belarus, I believe. So today, Estonian President Ala Karis has arrived in Kiev on September 12th. Remember, it was Kaja Kallas. She stepped down and she's now she has a prominent role in Europe, taking over from Joseph Borrell, I think. Anyway, he's over in Kiev today, arrived in a great city of Kiev, looking forward to all the meetings and discussions and hopefully continued support of the caliber that we've seen from the Baltic nations as a result of that. So Zelensky had a meeting with the Prime Minister of Croatia as well. Key topics of our conversation, said the Prime Minister, are humanitarian, demining, post-war reconstruction and energy facilities. All that could have come from Zelensky. Special thanks for the 11th military aid package announced today. So possibly elements going from Croatia to Ukraine as well. Former Prime Minister Gabriel Attal. So he's a Prime Minister, the young guy who was, I think, really effective as French Prime Minister in supporting Ukraine. Is very vocal about that in the assembly there in Paris. He's now no longer the Prime Minister. It's now Michel Barnier, which is an interesting choice. Gabriel Attal is travelling to Ukraine on Friday and Saturday, where he'll speak at a conference in the presence of Volodymyr Zelensky. He will speak at the Yalta European Strategy, an international conference that brings together political and business leaders from several countries to discuss Ukraine's place and future. He will also meet Ukraine political and economic leaders and then the French community. He will visit the port city of Odessa on Saturday, a frequent target of Russian strikes, and will be accompanied by Valérie Hayer, the president of the Renew Group in the European Parliament, and French MPs Benjamin Haddad and Anne Genetet. So a number of key French movers and shakers there in Ukraine. That's really good news, keeping it at the top of the agenda. Now, Recep Erdogan, the Turkish president, has reaffirmed his stance on Ukraine. Quote, "Our support for Ukraine's territorial integrity, sovereignty and independence is unwavering," he said in a video message to the 4th Crimean Platform Leaders Summit on Wednesday. Turkey's state-run Anadolu agency reported, quote, "The return of Crimea to Ukraine is a requirement of international law." Now, what's interesting here, because you might wonder why Turkey straddle both sides of the fence with regard to Ukraine. They give a lot of aid to Ukraine. They're members of NATO. They hold the key to the war in general. So I've told you before, the 1931 Montreux Convention that allows Turkey to shut down the Bosphorus Straits, which is the entrance to the Black Sea for warring parties in the Black Sea, means that they have stopped Russia's navy from entering the Black Sea. They only had the navy that they either had there or that they can get down canals into the Black Sea. I think it is because of Turkey's use of the Montreux Convention that Ukraine is still fighting this war. That's my personal opinion. So on the one hand, they're super supportive of Ukraine. Some of the rhetoric has been very strong. the military support has been pretty good. Their economic military support. So his his son-in-law runs the Bayraktar company that produces Baykar that produces the Bayraktar drones and other equipment as well, being designed and also given to or sold to Ukraine. So there's a lot going on there. They're also building 2 ships, or they're just testing those 2 ships that have been built in the Black Sea. So yeah. On the other hand, they launder Russian money through their economy. They're open to Russian tourists. They're not sanctioning Russia. They are speaking out both sides of their mouth. So they're doing all of this, and it's really frustrating. But I guess for him, he's just thinking about what's to the benefit of Turkey. We need money. Like, inflation is rampant in Turkey. It's amazing that he got voted back in, because the economy was absolutely getting hammered and continues to be so. But there's an interesting side to this, and that is the Crimean Tatars who are Islamic and that connection to Turkey. And so I think there's no surprise, there's no coincidence actually, that he is saying this kind of rhetoric about unwavering support, because those Tatars have been oppressed by the Russians as they've gone into Crimea since 2014, and the Ukrainians, like the Ukrainian government, have been very supportive of the Crimean Tatars. And so, yeah, I think there is a connection there with with Turkey with regard to Islam. Anyway, the Kyiv Independent reports that there is this Chinese-Brazilian peace initiative that's being drafted, and Zelensky's blasted it, saying you either support war or you don't. And he calls that peace initiative destructive. Zelensky criticized it as it was put forward by Brazil and China in an interview with Brazilian outlet Metropolis, published on September the 12th. Words are difficult for me today. I've spoken too many of them this week. Right, Norwegian intelligence has warned that Russia's campaign of sabotage in Europe will soon expand to Norway, specifically oil and gas infrastructure. So I'm sure they'll be ramping up security for their rigs out in the North Sea. You've got cables, you've got rigs, you've got the economy dependent on the security of these hydrocarbons and so on and so forth. So Norway are very worried at the moment. There are heightened worries concerning Russia's flexing and the threat of sabotage, which is a worry for the whole of Europe, of course, as well. Now, Donald Tusk has called off his visit to Germany, according to Euroactiv, as relations between the two countries worsen. There seems to be this difference between the two countries with regard to certain aspects of the war in Ukraine. You've had the surge of the AfD in Germany. You've had the surge of BSW, the far left in Germany. So the far right, the far left are surging, more so the far right. And the centre-left coalition there is panicking and wondering how to cope with that. And meanwhile, Poland has had a sort of the opposite, where the far right, the PIS in Poland, is now not in power, and you have a centrist government in power that are trying to be strong in supporting Ukraine. And the relationship between Poland and Germany has worsened, predominantly because of the Nord Stream pipeline. So if Ukraine were involved in the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline, there's one potential suspect that Poland allowed to go through Poland and back into Ukraine. They were kind of supportive of a potential, if it's true, there's still so many unknowns, but if Ukraine was behind the Nord Stream pipelines, then Poland appeared to be supportive of that, and that's really annoyed Germany. So as Max24 here says, Nord Stream pipelines, Berlin's request to arrest a Ukrainian citizen living in Poland suspected of causing the Nord Stream 2 pipeline explosion was rejected by Poland. So anyway, an interesting dynamic going on there. Now, not officially confirmed videos appeared of Radoslav Sikorski. So he's a foreign minister of Poland. He's married to Anne Applebaum. He's a massive supporter of Ukraine. And he appears to have been caught out in the same way that, David Cameron was caught out? Loads of people have been caught out by these bloody Russian pranksters, right, who are doing this. They're not just doing it for like comedy. They're like clearly politically orientated, supported by the Kremlin pranksters. So Sikorski was thinking he was speaking to Poroshenko, and they'd done this before with Poroshenko. I think that's how they got David Cameron, is thinking he was talking to Poroshenko. It was Giorgia Meloni was the other one as well, from Italy. It was at a point about a year ago or maybe more that she said she was everyone was tiring of the war and etc. etc. Anyway, this is what supposedly Sikorski said. So people from Trump's team told me, so as in Sikorski, that he will threaten Putin with escalation in order to make the best peace deal in Ukraine, which is similar to the Kellogg flights plan that was put forward by members, not directly of his team, but associated with his team. We are currently discussing the shooting down of Russian missiles over Western Ukraine, but at the moment it looks controversial. There is no agreement yet. If there are arrest warrants from Ukraine, Poland could certainly extradite Ukrainians who are hiding from the Ukrainian army. In other words, and this is quite controversial, but Poland would support extraditing those who are draft dodging and hiding in Poland, and there'll be a lot of them in Poland, absolutely no doubt. Some of our partners in the West use the idea of Ukraine joining NATO as a bargaining chip with Russia. That's almost certainly going to be the case. Whoever blew up Nord Stream, he did a quality job. The Americans knew about it, but did not stop it. Holy cow, that's a big one. Currently, Poland is not ready to defend Ukraine with its troops at the front, but if the defense of Ukraine begins to collapse, then everything can change. Yeah, absolutely. Ukraine's entry into the EU will take place in stages, but this process can take decades. Ukraine is a big country. Your membership in the EU will change the balance of power. And again, that's non-controversial. It will take Ukraine bloody ages to get into the EU. And it will change the balance of the EU completely, have huge economic and trade implications. It'll be very complex and difficult. It's going to take a long time. It's no easy thing. Tea break. Goddamn, Yorkshire tea is good. Right, okay. Ukraine wants India to moderate talks between Moscow and Kyiv, Bloomberg said, citing Ukraine's ambassador to New Delhi. That'd be interesting because Modi, you would think, even though he's an uncomfortable partner, I think, in BRICS, and, well, India is in general, because they're not particularly aligned with Russia. They're not like big friends of Russia. They're not big friends with China. So it's a very, in fact, none of those big three huge players there in the global geopolitics are naturally aligned. You'd think there might be. You'd think Russia and China are, communism and all that. But China doesn't have strict communism. It's got this kind of weird capitalist, massively strategically and centralized. They just got a bastardization of all of those ideologies. Russia's moved towards an oligarchy, a kind of cronyism. So there isn't really this kind of Marxist communist ideology that's joining the two naturally. They are very transactional, particularly actually China more so than Russia. Very transactional. I think Russia possibly has more ideology in what Putin believes, and Alexander Dugin as that nationalist, ultra-nationalist philosopher. I think there's more ideology going on with Russia. China, less so. It's just we want to look after our billion people, and we're going to do it in this kind of way, and I'm going to have power. It's a dictatorship. It's centralized. It's strategic, but it's we're in this for ourselves. Now, India, fairly similar actually. There's not too much moral dimension to their interactions with other global players. It's about what benefits India. So yeah, we're okay with the war in Ukraine because we're going to screw Russia for a bunch of cheap hydrocarbons. So it's an interesting choice if this is true, that Ukraine would be looking to Modi, considering he went to Moscow and hugged it out with Putin, but he then came to Kiev and hugged it out with Zelensky. So there's equal huggage. Is that a sensible one there? I mean, Russia are going to be very careful on who they allow to be moderating these discussions. Likewise, Ukraine. So I don't know what you guys think about that choice. Anyway, charging on. Ukraine wants India to moderate talks between... Oh no, I've just gone back to the other one. There are things are heating up in the Balkans again, says Ivana Stradner, who's a Balkans expert. Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister for Russia, has just said that there's the ethnic cleansing of the Serbs in Kosovo and compared it to the Donbass. Russian Ministry of Defense media pushed a narrative about ethnic cleansing in Yugoslavia and Western responsibility. A few days ago, Serbia's deputy prime minister met with the Russian government to discuss ethnic cleansing in Kosovo, and Russian and Serbian media have shared information that the Serbian president will discuss the occupation of Serbian territory and potential plans for getting the territory back. It is heating up big time by the looks of it. So that's one area to watch out for. While people are distracted with Ukraine, of course, these Balkan nations are going to be getting on with their own agenda in many cases. Right, a bombshell new poll has shown that opposition leader Peter Magyar, so this is in Hungary, he's the upstart former Fidesz party member. So Fidesz is Viktor Orban's ruling party. He's a quasi-dictator, certainly a dictator wannabe. He's an autocrat, the Hungarian leader, and he's been trying to ensure that his party just regains control and he maintains control through each subsequent election. But Peter Magyar, who was a former Fidesz party member, has now come out against them. He had that recording of his former wife and implicating the Orban as well, but Fidesz in wide-scale corruption. He's polling at 39%, Magyar, against the 43% of Orban's ruling Fidesz-KDNP coalition. Among decided voters, 25 against 30% among all adult citizens. So interesting that he is really coming forth at the moment, surging in the polls and looking to be seriously challenging the Fidesz mantle there. Now, talking of Hungary, Spain has blocked Hungary's attempt to buy a train company, and that's apparently over Ukraine concerns, according to the Financial Times. So, Ukraine and Russia and Hungary, all of these dynamics are having an effect on decisions made throughout Europe, throughout the world, and especially, when... I don't think people low information voters or people who aren't particularly interested in Ukraine, who don't think it's as important, who don't think it's that important, really don't understand how important the conflict is. Like when you're talking about the position China is taking vis-a-vis Taiwan, but also with regard to international trade, when you're talking about secondary sanctions from the US Treasury affecting how China does business, when you look at their Belt and Road Initiative, when you look at that in terms of what's gone on in Europe, when you look at Serbia and Hungary and the rail network between them being funded by the Chinese, and then you look at the connections then to Moscow and Russia and Hungary and Serbia's living under the sphere of influence of Putin, and all this spider web of geopolitics that I've been trying to express for the last 2.5 years means that conflicts like that in Ukraine with the Russians are massively important and have huge impacts on how the world is operating. And then that filters down to how we operate, like the cost of gas or petrol, however you want to say it, will be affected by that, and that affects energy prices, that affects how expensive things are, and inflation that affects you in your pocket. And you can link these things back to what goes on around the world, and then these big fights over the prices of these hydrocarbons. When you've got OPEC plus, the US trying to balance that by flooding the market with oil to try and keep the prices down, so inflation's down, so the ruling administration can win the election. All this kind of stuff going on. So Ukraine has rejected the extension of Russian gas transit after 2024. So gas going through Ukraine through the pipelines. Previous pre-war contract on gas transit from Russia to the EU, mainly to Slovakia, Hungary, and Austria, expires at the end of 2024. And Ukraine are going to be like, yeah, no, thanks. Price of Brent crude oil, so exactly what I was talking to, has fallen below 16. So it's under that kind of that iconic $70 a barrel price. A daily drop of more than 4%. I wonder how Russian Urals is doing. This is back on September the 10th. Come on, guys, don't stop. We need to reduce Russia's income from hydrocarbon sales as much as possible. There will be no bad, easy money, and the war will end very quickly. So there's an awful lot to talk about concerning this, because Russia's war is contingent upon the amount of money they got to spend on it, which is going to be driven largely by how much they're making out of hydrocarbons, which itself is driven by the price per barrel. OPEC have been trying to control that price to get the price up, so it's about cutting supply. So they've been enforcing their members to cut supply, and Russia's gone along with cutting supply, which means that in order to cut supply, they need to overcome that with very high prices, so they're getting more money per barrel because they're selling fewer barrels. And when they're then selling fewer barrels and the price is coming down, they are getting double whammy hit. So this is really good news for Ukraine, for the West, if you like. At the same time, the US has got an election coming up, and the Biden ticket, or the Harris ticket, is going to want price to be as low as possible in the US. So they are no doubt going to be drilling and maybe dipping into their strategic reserves as much as possible to flood the market with that to keep the price down, which will also affect how well Russia does in funding its war. All of this is connected. And I do believe someone was saying on my thread, I think the other day, that actually the gas prices in the US are way down at the moment compared to what they were. And that's going to be a really important component in how people are feeling about the economy, and therefore about how they feel about the Biden-Harris the Biden-Harris administration, and therefore about Harris. Okay. Russia continues to find ways to bypass restrictions and maintain steady profits from oil exports. However, it currently uses about 600 tankers classified as part of the shadow fleet. These tankers allow Russia to earn at least $17 to $18 billion per month. Highly recommended reading for this for a thorough understanding of the issues. So this is an RBC piece that details all of that. Shadow fleet, how Russia circumvents Western oil sanctions and Ukraine's struggle against this challenge. And of course, this is their way of getting around the price cap put on Russian oil, which has essentially negligible effect anymore because of their shenanigans here with ghost fleets and whatnot. Now, Putin has threatened the West with limiting uranium, titanium and nickel exports. US aircraft industry and nuclear power industry in particular depend on Russian titanium and uranium. My opinion is that people like Elon Musk depend on Russian natural resources and Chinese natural resources, which is why they're less than critical of those two regimes. Anyway, I digress. More than half of titanium alloys for the global aircraft industry are produced in Russia. For example, according to media reports, a European airplane manufacturer, Airbus, depended on imports of Russian titanium to the tune of 60% of their titanium in 2022. Therefore, at the moment, Western sanctions have not yet completely banned the import of these materials from Russia. This is rather similar to the energy problems in Europe. Like, we can't sanction the Russians too much in terms of export of oil and gas, because we get most of our oil and gas from there. So we need to spend time diversifying in order to deal with importing less and less from Russia. Now, certain countries have done a really good job of that, such as Germany, and they are big on trying to wean themselves off Russian oil and gas. Slovakia and Hungary less so, which is why when Ukraine turned off the pipelines going through their country to Slovakia and Hungary, they spit the dummy. They did that because they've not been bothered about trying to wean themselves off Russian gas and oil. In fact, they'll be getting kickbacks from Russia. Russia will be desperate to keep exporting to those countries. They're well in that sphere of influence, etc., etc. But it's very difficult to just turn off things like oil and gas like that when you are dependent upon them. that's the same for things like titanium in the aerospace industry. And so it's very difficult to say, right, that's it, we're not going to buy any more titanium from you, Russia. And then like, well, how do we build airplanes? Should we looked under the sofa? There might be some there. There's some in the shed. Is there some in the shed? I think there's some in the shed. So you unfortunately, you need to keep buying stuff from Russia until you can find alternatives. And it might be that there are no feasible alternatives. You know, it's not like, okay, we get 60% of our titanium Airbus from Russia. So, okay, suddenly we need 60% titanium. We're going to not get it from Russia. We need to get it from somewhere else. And, you know, they're already operating at whatever capacities they're operating at. It's like suddenly you've got to, okay, we're providing you with 40% of your titanium. Now you want us to you know, kind of double that? Well, I don't know if we can do that. So this is difficult. However, Russia also profits from supplying these goods to the West, as it earned a lot of money from it, and it won't be easily be able to find new buyers in the same volumes, which is kind of what I was saying. Okay, moving on. Today, foreign services will stop working in Russia. So it's the 12th of September. This is a day that this is what IT companies like Google, Microsoft, all these different providers have been working towards. It's a day it kind of gets switched off as according to sanctions, all because of these sanctions by the US Treasury on the supply of software and IT services to any person on the territory of Russia. This is huge. It's going to be interesting to see how things go tomorrow when things start going wrong in the IT world. And I wonder whether Ukrainian hackers are then be making things go wrong in the IT domain in Russia, and then Russia won't be able to pull on those, you know, on Microsoft, on Google to sort out those problems. It's going to be fascinating. That could be a really important component on the of the pressure put on Russia. Right, an Israeli citizen has been detained in the United States on charges of organizing the supply of aircraft parts to Russia to circumvent sanctions. The US Department of Justice said that 49-year-old Israeli citizen Gal Haimovich pleaded guilty to conspiracy to smuggle US aircraft parts to Russia, including the under-sanctioned Russian airlines. According to the Department of Justice, between April 2022 and 23, Haimovich arranged more than 160 shipments to companies in the Maldives and the UAE. So we've heard the UAE big time. I have mentioned the Maldives, I think, once before, but interesting. These companies were responsible for the illegal exports of goods to Russia. In particular, he supplied parts to the Russian airline S7 Airlines, which then paid him $2 million for the illegal exports. It's all about closing, they're not loopholes, but just enforcing the sanctions and holding these people to account that break the law. Come down on them like a ton of bricks. Now, take this with a pinch of salt. So Dmitry Medvedev previously, what is it? I don't know. They've done switcheroos with regard to being president and prime minister of Russia. So Putin and Medvedev, but he was a former prime minister. He is well known for liking a tipple, shall I say. He likes a bit of vodka in his lunch break. So Medvedev is seriously ill. Doctors have confirmed the diagnosis of cirrhosis of the liver. Now, this is a classic kind of potential rumor because it's so plausible. This is coming from Rosmi, but I have no evidence of this anywhere else. So Jürgen Naudit is saying this. I've seen it on Twitter a few times, but not in any mainstream media outlet. So just be very warned. He was prescribed treatments and given recommendations. As Jürgen Naudit says, who would have thought that now? I mean, it's par for the course. He's known as a massive drinker, but it might not be true at all. Okay, moving on. So there's been this rumbling issue of the Russians at War documentary film that has been shown at a number of film festivals, Venice Film Festival, and then it's looking to be shown at this Canadian film festival, and actually got funding. So Ukrainian Canadian Congress calls for an investigation into budget funding of Russians at War film. The UCC claims that the film, which received $340,000 from Canadian taxpayers, equates the aggressor and the victim. So this is a problematic film because supposedly it kind of whitewashes Russian war crimes and says that, hey, we were embedded with the Russians, we're trying to be objective, but of course you can't embed yourself with the Russian forces without Kremlin permission and MOD permission, etc., etc. So in other words, this was effectively a sanctioned piece of propaganda. Okay, given that, why is it being allowed to be played to audiences at film festivals, and why is it receive funding from the Canadian taxpayer? So all these questions are going around, and of course, it's quite difficult. Well, I don't know if it is difficult. Sometimes, but it's easy to be hoodwinked, right? I guess is what I'm trying to say. So it's easy to blame the Canadians, but then that's a lot of money, and you should do due diligence on that. So that is not cool. Anyway, what the filmmakers said is that what the quote was, I didn't see Russians committing war crimes. So when they were filming it, I didn't see Russians committing war crimes. And now that's gone a bit viral, and I'll show you a couple of examples of what's happened there. But the Canadian government officials, including Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland, have strongly criticised the use of public funds to support a controversial documentary that portrays Russian soldiers fighting in Ukraine. Okay, then you get these, like, I didn't see Russians committing war crimes. And they've superimposed the documentary film team as they appear at the one of the pictures of them appearing at I think, a film festival. And they photoshopped that onto loads of war crimes. So children's torture chamber found in Kherson after deoccupation, and you got these people standing in the corner. And you got I didn't see Russians committing war crimes, and you got these guys at Butcher. Loads of them. I didn't see them commit. That's the children. That's the museum in Mariupol that was bombed, and it had children written outside on the pavement, on the car park, and it was still bombed from the air. And you got them there. You got I didn't see Russians committing war crimes, and again, this is out in I think the forest around. It might be actually Izium or somewhere around there, or it could be up near Kiev. But anyway, you get the point, and they're superimposed on each of these, and there's been this pressure on the Canadians. And good news, TVO, one of the backers of the Russians at War film, has pulled their support. We have listened to the Ukrainian-Canadian community and their thoughtful and heartfelt input. TVO's board of directors has decided to respect the feedback we have received. TVO will no longer be supporting or airing Russians at War. TVO will be reviewing the process by which this project was funded and our brand leveraged. Chris Day, Chair, TVO Board of Directors. So that's really good, and that's pressure from public support, not about the memes. It wasn't the memes that was doing that. It's all part of it, though, isn't it? But it's people appealing directly to, and pressure being put on them both publicly and probably privately. So TVO, so Anton Gerashchenko, the Canadian agency that provided taxpayer funds to finance the production of the film by Anastasia Trofimova, is withdrawing its support and screenings of the project. Now, Anton Gerashchenko was one of the people calling for lots of pressure on them and on Canadian officials here. So he says, I'm very grateful to each and every person who fought for that. So many people contributed to this happening. So he was, I don't know whether he was masterminding it, but he was certainly involved in it. The second screenshot shows a reaction of the shocked producers of the film to TVO's decision. As far as I understand, TIFF.net, or TIFF_net here, has done nothing about the movie so far. The screenings have not been cancelled. So that is the, I think is it the International Film Festival, Toronto International Film Festival? Is that what it stands for? TIFF? I think so. Anyway, as you can see, several hours ago, TVO informed us that they will no longer be supporting or airing Russians at War. They've issued a statement, here's ours. And they say, we are shocked by the TVO Board of Directors' sudden decision, made without consultation with the filmmakers, to withdraw their support, blah, blah, blah. We acknowledge the pain and anger of the Ukrainians in Canada, including refugees, yada, 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 yada. And they kind of whinge about that. But as far as I'm concerned, good stuff. Well done. Well done for putting support. Screw you. Anyway, moving on to restrictions and the meeting or the visit of Blinken and Lamy to Kiev on behalf of the US and UK governments to try and discuss the lifting of restrictions. Remember, there are all these letters that have been sent by bipartisan members of the House and Senate in the US. As Secretary Blinken and David Lammy travelled to Kiev, 17 top former officials and experts call on the US and UK to let Ukraine strike back. It's time to change this White House policy and let Ukraine win. Loads of pressure from all over the shop. Okay, so then they got to Ukraine, and there were announcements of aid packages from both countries, really quite significant, mainly in the humanitarian and energy sectors. UK, there is some military equipment, I think, in there. No details of that yet. This wasn't, although it's a lot of support from the US. I think $700 million worth of support. It wasn't military support. But anyway, there was stuff coming out of this meeting. Then there was the idea that it's interesting that Bloomberg reports it this way. So the USA is demanding from Zelensky a detailed strategy of strikes against Russia before lifting restrictions. Because I know that previously the Ukrainians had gone to the US and said, these are the things we want to strike. But I don't know whether that was asked for by the Americans or whether that was a Ukrainian decision. But anyway, the US has apparently asked for detailed strategy of strikes. Blinken, and so it's not just what the targets are, but like how would you do this, in what context, why, so on and so forth. Blinken and Lamy plan to press the Ukrainian president to get a clear vision of Kiev's long-term goals for the coming year. So part of this, so the US, remember, has a strategy that's now gone, that secret report strategy is as part of the $61 billion aid package that was released. God, when was it now? April? The one that was 7 months in the making. Yeah, I think it's April. As part of that, they're supposed to get within 45 days this strategy from the US of how they were going to support Ukraine to win or prevail or whatever what were the objectives. Now, in line with that report having gone out, the Americans are also asking Ukraine for long-term strategies on how they are going to prosecute this war and how they're going to win it. So Zelensky gave a detailed pitch to Blinken and Lamy on the need for long-range strikes, according to a source says. Kyiv Independent. Zelensky provided that detailed account to Blinken and Lamy of why Ukraine needs permission to strike targets deep inside Russia. It remains unclear whether the decision on the long-range strikes will be taken during the Starmer-Biden meeting this week or in September during a UN assembly in New York, the source said. So on Friday, what day is it today? Thursday, isn't it? So tomorrow, Biden and Starmer, the new Prime Minister in the UK, are due to meet. Quote from Blinken, President Biden intends to discuss with the British Prime Minister Starmer on Friday permission for the Ukrainian armed forces to strike Russia with Western long-range weapons. This is still rumbling on. There's still no answer yet. And indeed, according to ABC News, no decisions were made on Ukraine's use of American long-range weapons against Russia during the meeting between Blinken and Zelensky. I think it's essentially got to come from Biden is probably the idea. My opinion is this is all too bloody public, and it ramps up the importance. There's almost a false importance put on this because of all this shenanigans going on. So don't talk about it. Like I said to you the other day, don't talk about it. Let it happen and just assume it's cool. Zelensky gave Blinken a detailed plan of how they'd be used and what the targets would be. Now, Euromaidan Press today reported that US is finalising plans to ease restrictions on Ukraine's use of US-sent weapons, potentially allowing deeper strikes into Russia. Although there are some worries that it's going to be with loads of caveats. So you can hit this but not hit that, rather than saying, okay, you fine, go and do what you like type thing. There might still be fingerprints of the US administration all over it. This is according to a Western official and two other individuals familiar with the discussions, as I say, as reported by Politico. London, on the other hand, will allow Kiev to fire Storm Shadow missiles deep into the Russian Federation, according to The Guardian, as I mentioned yesterday. Sources in the British government are saying. So, again, it's the idea that the British are fine with this. It's the Americans that are holding the Ukrainians back and holding them back from using British weapons. The publication writes that the British authorities have already made a decision, but will not announce it publicly. According to the sources, if a positive decision on Storm Shadow had not been made, US Secretary of State Blinken and British Foreign Minister Lamy would not have come to Kyiv to meet with the Ukrainian president. In other words, yeah, it's definitely fine to use British weapons. Otherwise, that meeting wouldn't have happened. But Dmitry Peskov, the Russian spokesperson, will respond to Ukraine's permission to launch strikes with Western missiles deep into Russian territory. According to the Kremlin spokesman, such a decision significantly increases the degree of involvement of the countries of the collective West in the conflict. Moscow has no doubt that the decision to lift restrictions on the use of long-range missiles to attack Russian territory was made long ago, said Minister Lavrov. So that's Sergei Lavrov then chipping in. Guardian quoted sources as saying that the UK would allow Ukraine to strike Russia with Storm Shadow missiles. Okay. Michael Weiss rightly says, why even announce it? Let the announcement be a Storm Shadow strike in Russia. That's your announcement. So Lamy, though, suggests a decision on long-range weapons may not be imminent. Quote, as the closest of allies, we look forward to the discussions we will have, not just on Friday, but discussions, I suspect, that will go on over the next few weeks as we head to the UN General Assembly. So that's why people are worrying that actually it won't be decided at the Biden-Starmer meeting, but actually in the UN General Assembly, which is just freaking frustrating. On top of this, UK has sanctioned 10 out of 850 Russian shadow fleet tankers. I presume that's 10 more rather than 10 in total. A group of ships that use illicit practices to avoid sanctions on Russian oil. Yeah, keep that going and more and add. But Politico does say that at the moment the West is running out of ways to punish Iran. So, okay, we're moving from Russia to Iran, but I guess the discussion is still pertinent for Russia. Like, it was thought long ago that there aren't too many more avenues to keep sanctioning Russia. The way you sanction Russia is to actually secondary sanctions on Chinese banks and secondary sanctions on China. China is a key to screwing over Russia at the moment. But with Iran and, say, North Korea, these countries are massively sanctioned. They're sanctioned to the hill. And actually applying more sanctions becomes ever more difficult. So the Politico article says, and this is of course important because both countries are supplying ballistic missiles to Russia to use against Ukraine. So anyway, the Politico article says, quote, officials and lawmakers tell National Security Daily, that Western governments have few avenues left to try and stop Iranian missile shipments to Russia. The Biden admin has tried nothing and is all out of ideas. My suggestion the other day was don't punish Iran, punish Russia. So you draw up your red line. So instead of saying, Iran, if you provide those missiles to Russia, we're going to screw you over. Yep, do that to the max. But if you've got nowhere to go, you say, instead of blaming the seller, the vendor, blame the buyer. So Russia, if you use Iranian missiles, especially as you're a member of the UN Security Council and you're buying these missiles from sanctioned Iran and you're getting these missiles from sanctioned North Korea, if you get them and if you use them against Ukraine, then we will allow Ukraine to do anything they bloody want. Those red lines are the way we sanction this from happening, the way we stop this from happening. If we're going to stop it at all, it's going to be by putting these red lines on Russia and threatening Russia. If you use missiles from North Korea, then say goodbye to your tank manufacturing facility in Omsk, because Ukraine will be allowed to hit that with Western supplied long-range missiles. Biden administration has tried nothing and is all out of ideas, says Colby Badwa. I don't know they've tried nothing. I think that's probably understating the work they're doing on Iran. These things are really complex, right? Trying to not only sanction people and entities, but uphold those sanctions and monitor everything that these people and entities do. It's a massively complex process. So it's very difficult to sanction. Anyway, Colby Badwa says, why are they unwilling to reapply the Trump administration's sanctions on Iran's oil exports? There is a lot that they can do to directly hold Iran accountable. True, but then we go back to, and this is realpolitik, right? You can sanction their oil exports and that will affect the global oil price, and then that will actually mean the price will go up. Russia will step into that hole and put supply into the world market because they'll make a pretty penny, plus the price has gone up and Russia will get loads more money. So it's difficult to say we're going to sanction Iran's oil supplies, but also the realpolitik of this is Biden, or in this case Harris, wants to win the election, and to win the election, it's all about inflation. And if you're going to sanction Russia's oil, you are going to lose an election. It's literally is that simple. If we sanction Iranian oil, then Harris won't get in. We don't win the election. It's all about winning the election. You can't do anything without winning the election. And you can't rely on a Trump administration to do the right thing by Ukraine. So really difficult decisions, but it's not easy sanctioning. But I'd assume that the US are going to be trying to do everything they can, practically. Okay, Ukraine's membership of NATO is inevitable and a country is on the way to joining the alliance. This is coming from Blinken. It's from the Ukrainian Review. I'd like to see the source quote from this, but as ever, they don't do that. Slightly frustrating. Why this is so important is, and this is good news, is because Biden has previously been a bit reluctant to talk about Ukraine joining NATO. He's actually quite explicitly previously said that's not really the important thing. We want to be worrying about this. Don't we want to be worrying about joining NATO? But Ukraine had been desperate to be given at least the right signals and be put on this pathway to joining NATO. And for Blinken to say that, I'm wondering whether in this interim period where Biden's a lame duck, you're starting to get the Biden administration, that their foreign policy team, move towards a Harris. So this needs to be seen in the context of the lifting of restrictions, where Biden is maybe being sidelined and people are looking forward to, well, if the Democrats do win and Harris takes over, then actually Harris's team is going to be much more bullish against Russia and much more supportive of Ukraine in a more overt way. So Blinken's now saying, yep, we're okay with you joining NATO, which is against what Biden has said before. I think this is important. And that's why I need to actually have time to look into where that quote comes from. But if Blinken has said that, that is massively important and needs to be seen in that wider context, political context. And Trentelenko says this is an improvement. So Alex Rafuglu says, happening now, the bottom line is this: we want Ukraine to win, Blinken says in Kyiv. So again, we are seeing a slight change in rhetoric. Before it's like, we are in this for as long as it takes. If he's actually said, we want Ukraine to win, that is a change in rhetoric, and that has been sanctioned somewhere. This is important again. Quote, we remain fully committed to Ukraine's victory, to not only ensuring that Ukraine can defend itself today, but can stand on its own feet strongly, militarily, economically, democratically for many, many days ahead of securing the path the Ukrainian people have chosen toward greater integration in the Euro-Atlantic community, including the EU and NATO. So there you go. That's that NATO part in there. To getting a just and lasting peace. Our support will not wane. Our unity will not break. Putin will not outlast a coalition of countries committed to Ukraine's success. And he's certainly not going to outlast the Ukrainian people. They've never wavered in their belief that they alone will decide their future. Now we have challenging moments. This is a challenging moment as well. And with the expansion of attacks from Russia, humbling Ukrainian cities, citizens' infrastructure with monstrous brutality, and now Putin's further empowering his aggression with the acquisition of Iranian ballistic missiles. So we're working with urgency to continue to ensure that Ukraine has what it needs to effectively defend itself. Absolutely massive, this. And then, of course, he announced all of those parts of the package, 325 million in new funding to help repair energy and electric grid in Ukraine, 290 million in humanitarian support, safe drinking water, food, shelter and medicine, $102 million in humanitarian demining. She then said G7 partners agreed to deliver $50 billion from Russian frozen assets to pay for Ukraine's reconstruction and defense. And we're working to meet that commitment to operationalize it. And we, our allies, will continue to impose costs on countries that support Russia's war machine. This is super, super important rhetoric here. People might just go, oh, same old, same old. This is different. This is meaningfully different. So actually that puts me in a good frame of mind with a potential slight change of tack for a potential Harris victory. Okay, now we're going to get onto the debate stuff, which I think is incredibly important. It gives you an indication of what each side would do with regard to Ukraine and why, in my opinion, we should clearly support one side over the other. I have my own political predilections, of course, and that would naturally dispose me towards supporting the Democrats due to domestic issues, social moral issues, economic issues. But putting all that aside, if Ukraine was the only thing that was of concern to us as voters, I'm not a US voter, of course, but if Ukraine was the only thing that was important, it's a clear decision. Harris and the Democrats, and not Trump, and just not Trump. I'd say not Trump and the Republicans. There are a good many Republicans, and in polls indicate this. And what individual lawmakers have said indicates this. And actually how you've got really strong bipartisan support through Congress for Ukraine indicates that Republicans in general, as you would expect if you were to go back to Reagan, are generally in support of Ukraine. It's just that all the important movers and shakers at the top of the ticket, from Trump to Vance to then his supporters, he's just had debate preparation given to him by Matt Gaetz, massive supporter of Russia against Ukraine, is totally anti-Ukraine. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Paul Gosar, Jim Jordan, all these people in the MAGA universe, and then Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller and all these people around him, his surrogates and voices, they are all anti-Ukraine. And it's perfectly obvious who would be a better choice, in my opinion. And this is what Kamala Harris had to say at the debate.
I believe the reason that Donald Trump says that this war would be over within 24 hours is because he would just give it up. And that's not who we are as Americans. Let's understand what happened here. I actually met with Zelensky a few days before Russia invaded, tried through force to change territorial boundaries, to defy one of the most important international rules and norms, which is the importance of sovereignty and territorial integrity. And I met with President Zelensky. I shared with him American intelligence about how he could defend himself. Days later, I went to NATO's eastern flank.
There's several things she's doing here. One, Trump lied about her previously, and he did this several occasions, and he said he said Harris met with Putin days before the war, and he laughed at her and blah, 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 blah. And that was a lie. She's never met Putin. It was an outright lie. And she's correcting that. She said, I didn't meet with Putin. I met 3 days before with Zelensky. And actually, this is what we discussed. But what she's doing here, more importantly, is not just a corrective, but speaking to those who don't really know her. She's introducing herself to the audience. Some of these will be undecided voters or low information voters who don't really know who Kamala Harris is. Everyone knows who Trump is. He's at the height of the ceiling of knowing who he is, right? So there is no one in the US who's like, oh, I wonder who Trump is. I might vote for him. I don't know much about him, though. That's not the case, but that is the case for Harris. So as I discussed in my analysis of the debate, one of the main themes of the debate, one of the main objectives for her was introduce herself to the American public, because even as deputy, as a vice president, even in that position, people don't know her and they haven't known what she's done. And she's explaining to people what she has done. But she's also explaining to people that she's presidential, that she's commander-in-chief material, by saying, I've met with these people, I've done this stuff, and we, etc., etc. And she talks in quite granular terms of like talking about Abrams tanks and all sorts, as you'll see. So there are many things that she's trying to do here whilst correcting Trump as well.
I shared with him American intelligence about how he could defend himself. Days later, I went to NATO's eastern flank, to Poland and Romania. And through the work that I and others did, we brought 50 countries together to support Ukraine in its righteous defense. And because of our support, because of the air defense, the ammunition, the artillery, the javelins, the Abrams tanks that we have provided, Ukraine stands as an independent and free country. If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now. And understand what that would mean, because Putin's agenda is not just about Ukraine. Understand why the European allies and our NATO allies are so thankful that you are no longer president, and that we understand the importance of the greatest military alliance the world has ever known, which is NATO, and what we have done to preserve.
So that was a little barbed attack, because he denigrates NATO all the time, and he's really trying to get the US out of NATO and allow the vacuum to be taken up by essentially Russia and China. That little side look to him is you might not think it's important, but everyone else knows that NATO is the single greatest military alliance in the history of the world.
Military alliance the world has ever known, which is NATO. And what we have done,
which is NATO,
to preserve the ability of Zelensky and the Ukrainians to fight for their independence. Otherwise, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv with his eyes on the rest of Europe, starting with Poland. And why don't you tell the 800,000 Polish Americans right here in Pennsylvania how...
This is incredibly important. I talked about this before. She's talking to particular people. There will be a lot of Polish Americans in Pennsylvania who will be listening to this going, yeah. And in fact, this part of her speech here, her answer here went down, I think, very well in Poland. I think, did Anne Applebaum talk about this? She lives in Poland. She's married to the Polish foreign minister. This is a really big statement she made here. Don't underestimate that.
Eyes on the rest of Europe, starting with Poland. And why don't you tell the 800,000 Polish Americans right here in Pennsylvania how quickly you would give up for the sake of favor and what you think is a friendship with what is known to be a dictator who would eat you for lunch.
That is so freaking powerful. So it's really interesting. I was listening to Sarah Longwell, who has her job is looking at focus groups of undecided and swing voters and soft kind of Republican voters or Biden voters who are swing voters who have voted Biden and Trump before, but kind of not sure about Trump, but unsure in an undecided way, as in don't know enough information about Kamala Harris. And she was talking about this. I was watching it this morning, and she was saying all of them are like saying how presidential she looked, and they were all like really impressed with certain elements of what she's saying. This is one of them, and just showing like the idea that Putin would eat you alive. And there are also some of these undecided voters saying, oh, I didn't know that she did this, or I didn't know. Like, there is just a lot of lack of knowledge about what she's achieved and what she's done and what her job has been as vice president. And she's actually genuinely educating some people. This is one of the themes and one of the objectives of this whole debate was to reach out and introduce herself to her own electorate who don't really know her that well, and saying, this is who I am and this is what I've done. And they're going, oh, right, I didn't know that. Brilliant. And Sarah Longwell is fascinating. I mean, it's only a small sample size, but these people have been very carefully selected to be representative and to be exactly the sort of people you'd be wanting to convince. A very interesting part of the whole debate, this.
And what you think is a friendship with what is known to be a dictator who would eat you for lunch.
It's just a mic drop moment, in my opinion. Now, what Trump said in return to not that part, but a bit earlier, where she was bringing up that so many NATO leaders think he's a disgrace and a laughing stock, and his own former commander-in-chief, Mark Milley and Esper, and all these Republicans who have worked within John Bolton, adverts now showing this, have come out and endorsed Kamala Harris and said that he's not fit for purpose. His response to that, Trump's response to that was like, yeah, but Viktor Orban loves me and he's one of the strongest, best guys in like, he's trying to get a character reference from a dictator wannabe autocrat that actually isn't that popular. But what's really interesting, and again, Tim Miller keeps talking about this, and I must remind you guys about this, or let you guys know about this. We are high information people, particularly with regard to this context, but also I am with regard to like the memes going on the internet and the politics and these kind of cats and dogs. And I knew that was coming from JD Vance and where the story came from. And there are elements that exist in the right-wing manosphere sometimes, or just the right-wing alt-right communities, that if you know about it, you know about it. Trump has been existing in that space, and he has many of his advisors in that space, and people like JD Vance live in that space as well. So when he says a lot of stuff in debate, he's assuming that the audience know that stuff too. I know that, you may know that, but like I keep saying, the most important thing about this debate was reaching the low information swing voters, independents and undecideds here, and stealing people from maybe across the aisle. So when you keep talking to people as if they know stuff that you know, a lot of times, and Sarah Longwell's talking about this, a lot of this goes over people's head and they're like, what is he talking about? So the whole cats and dogs things, like a lot of people are like, what are you on about? That's mental. But also with regard to people like Viktor Orban. So when he mentions how Viktor Orban loves him, for you and I, we know who Viktor Orban is, and that's a bad thing to say. But that's not going to be what falls on most people who are watching that debate in low information electorate America. They are going to be thinking, I have no idea who Viktor Orban is, or what you're talking about. And actually, he's assuming that will have more heft than it actually will. And that happened an awful lot in a debate where the subject matter he's talking about is kind of internet subject matter that only so many people know anything about. And they're usually the ones who are already deep in Trump world anyway. So he was asked twice, very explicitly, do you want Ukraine to win? And he evaded answering that question at all, or evaded answering it with a yes or no.
Do you want Ukraine to win this war?
I want the war to stop.
Do you want...
And so that was the first time. I think then the second time he said, look, I've asked you this before. You didn't answer the question. Yes or no? Do you want Ukraine to win? And he answered the same. Trump answered the same way again, which is, I want the war to end. Too many people are dying. No. Do you want Ukraine to win? In other words, and he did this before, and like a year ago, there was an interview where he did exactly the same thing. He was pressed on this, and he refused to admit that he wanted Ukraine to win. In other words, he doesn't want Ukraine to win. He's afraid of saying, yes, I want Ukraine to win. Why is the president of the US, former president of the US, and nominee for the Republican Party, unwilling to say that he wants Ukraine to win against Russia in a war? Why is that? And if you still support Trump in this election, why are you supporting someone who will not admit that he wants Ukraine to prevail? Why are you supporting him? Riddle me that. Please put down in the thread why you think Trump is the best option for Ukraine, and why he is, when he won't even admit that he wants them to prevail. And yet the other side is being absolutely clear. Anthony Blinken has just told us where the Biden-Harris administration sit. Kamala Harris has been nothing but clear. You, Trump, would be eaten for lunch by a dictator. The other thing he did, and I know the Logan Act isn't going to ever be acted on, but as I said the other day, Donald Trump just admitted to meeting with Putin after he left office.
I'll speak to one, I'll speak to the other, I'll get them together. That war would have never happened. And in fact, when I saw...
So remember, the question here is, how would you solve the war? How would you stop the war happening in 24 hours? And of course, he's just full of the moon is made of cheese, because I tell you it is. And you're going to have $1 billion, and you're going to live to 647 years old, and you're going to have 54 children. Where are you pulling this from? He's like, how are you going to stop the war? I'll get him together, and abracadabra. Here we go. The war has finished. Well done, me.
I'll speak to one, I'll speak to the other, I'll get them together. That war would have never happened. And in fact, when
we'll kiss,
saw Putin,
we'll hold hands.
After I left,
it'd be beautiful.
Unfortunately left because our country has gone to hell. But after I left...
I met Putin after I left. So in other words, he was going against the Logan Act, which says basically you can't represent your country without permission, unsanctioned. You can't basically be doing politics on behalf of you. A bit sort of like him meeting, because he said, I won't go and meet Zelensky because I'm not president, and that's the wrong thing to do. And then literally 2 days later, he lay out the red carpet, made Mar-a-Lago look like the White House, and had Viktor Orban come in and meet him in Mar-a-Lago. Well, actually, you shouldn't be doing that not as president of the US. What do you do? What are you doing effectively fulfilling kind of diplomatic roles in meeting with heads of state unsanctioned by your own government? But here he's admitting he did that with Putin. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's statements on Ukraine at the debate. Trump, I want the war to end. Trump answering the question whether he wants Ukraine to win the war. It is in the national interest of the US for the war to end. I will stop this war before I become president. Ukraine's war with Russia could lead to World War III. We are very close. But no details on what he would do. like and who he wants to win. Harris said Trump will simply surrender to Ukraine. If he were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now. Ukraine has a right to defend itself. Thanks to the support of the United States and allies, it continues to confront and fight back against Russian troops. Thanks to American missiles and equipment, Ukraine still exists and defends itself. The implication being you should continue doing that, right? And that's a good and right thing to do. And the evidence we have at the moment is that's possibly going to change slightly for the better, with Blinken changing some rhetoric there and maybe the lifting of restrictions in line with more what Harris might want. Okay, Pekka Kallioniemi, one of my sources I often use, says, as there's clearly not much to say about the debate other than Trump was deranged and he had clearly abandoned Ukraine and appeased Russia, I'm just going to post the best memes and posts about the whole thing. Post your favourites. And then he just goes on a bit of a meme hunt there. But basically... the general synopsis for people that are supportive of Ukraine that were covering the debate is that, Trump just looks like he'll go down the appeasement route and Harris looks like she'd support Ukraine. Phillips O'Brien likewise says, anyone who is surprised that Trump loves Putin, respects Orban and wants Ukraine to lose has not been paying attention. What Trump said in the debate is what he's been saying out loud for years. It's actually one of the things he's been most honest about. And I fully agree with that. And I did a whole video on exactly what Trump thinks about Ukraine and has thought about Ukraine since the early 2000s. Go and check out my Trump video. It will let you know all you need to know. Anyway, it's interesting that Trump is completely full of crapola on European versus American support for Ukraine. So his claims on American support, as in monetary support, and Europeans' lack of support was woefully wrong. And that really annoys me because he was lying to the audience. It's one of the 33 lies that he let out. Europe has paid more than the US, and for him to lie not only on how much the US has given, but also on how much the Europeans have given, is egregious. It's not cool. Now, what's interesting, Ben Hodges, who's a bit of a legend here, he's says the following, and I'm going to let him say it as a whole because he's such an important voice in support of Ukraine.
I was a Republican. I was born into a Republican family in North Florida many years ago. I was Republican almost my entire life. I guess I would be in this camp of Reagan Republicans, that type of Republican. But after January 6th, I decided I could not be associated with the Republican Party anymore. And then I look at Donald Trump and the way he incited people, the way he showed such disrespect for our processes, our processes have never been perfect, but they are what most other people in the world aspire to. And so that he was so callous about it, and then to get people fired up with claims that the election was stolen. I was in the leadership business for almost 4 decades as an Army officer, and the things you look for are integrity, reliability, somebody that always speaks the truth, that respects our institutions, and he exhibited none of those characteristics that I would expect from even a brand new lieutenant.
I couldn't put it better myself. Now, another thing he said, and this is with regard to the geopolitical context of these videos, is that, well, let's go to the Washington Post. So Trump debate claims about German energy policy are wrong, says Berlin. So he's not doing himself any favors with regard to international relations here. Trump said, you believe in things talking to or about Kamala Harris. You believe in things like we're not going to frack, we're not going to take fossil oil, we're not going to do things that are going to make this country strong, whether you like it or not, Trump said on Tuesday night, referring to Harris. Germany tried that, and within 1 year, they were back to building normal energy plants. Hours later, in an uncharacteristically direct statement, the German Foreign Ministry fact-checked Trump's claims on its English language Twitter account, which is here. Like it or not, Germany's energy system is fully operational with more than 50% renewables. We are shutting down, not building, coal and nuclear plants. Coal will be off the grid by 2038 at the latest. P.S. We also don't eat cats and dogs. Hashtag debate 2024. Ouch. The German Foreign Office is taking a piss out of Trump there. That's interesting. Like talking about cats and dogs and the eating, the claim about Haitian immigrants eating cats and dogs that he made. But also just putting him in his place. Trump needs to be careful here because you can't just run roughshod over facts. Well, he appears to have done that for the last 9 years. But it's just... It's dangerous when you play this fast and loose with facts. Tim Walz, the potential vice president, at least the pick for Kamala Harris here, talking about Viktor Orban and the place he played in character reference of Trump.
It empowers Putin, it empowers dictators. But again, one example, he was asked for one world leader who was with him, and it's Orban. My God, that's all you need to know. You've got a leader in Kamala Harris that understands the importance of these alliances. She understands what it truly means to stand up for the Western democracies, and she truly means to talk about others. Donald Trump talked about himself 99% of the time, and if he wasn't talking about that, he was talking about Orban. So it was couldn't have been clearer. Couldn't have been clearer. And I'd just like to say, if I can make my plug, she did her job. Americans need to do theirs. Get engaged. Get the facts. Go to KamalaHarris.com. Go down and do some door knocking. Talk to your neighbor. Talk to your relatives. It was clear tonight that there is only one person on that stage that should be president of the United States, and that was Kamala Harris. It empowers Putin.
Interesting. He's absolutely right. Who does Trump go to seek kind of solace and support? Viktor Orban. We spend our life here. I spend my huge amount of time slagging off Viktor Orban for being an autocrat who supports Putin, and that's Trump's best mate in international diplomacy. You should be super worried about that if you're a supporter of Trump. Now, what's interesting, last thing I'll talk about is how the Russian state and propagandists and TV reacted to the debate. So there is shock and dismay on Russian state television, says Republicans Against Trump, since Moscow's true preferred candidate, Donald Trump, was no match for Vice President Kamala Harris in Tuesday's debate. In the run-up to the presidential debate, Russian state TV propagandists constantly predicted that a charismatic Trump, quote, charismatic Trump, previously described as our Donald, would resoundingly defeat his opponents. But it didn't happen. There's an article that Julia Davis, who is Russian media monitor, has done in the Daily Beast. To talk to that, it'll be behind a paywall. Putin pals eat crow as complete fool creams our Donald. So there you go. That's actually, no, it's not behind a paywall, this one. So interesting. So Daily Beast, right. So Julia Davis there writes about how the Russians have reacted to what they see as a debate defeat for Donald Trump. So Julia Davis herself says a panelist from the Russian International Affairs Council, Alexei Naumov, said, quote, she, that's Kamala Harris, managed to lure Trump into every trap she set for him. I wish I hadn't watched that. So this is a mission that she won the debate and Trump lost it, and then they're having to eat humble pie and they're not happy about it. So the Kyiv Independent reports, not for the first time, there are mixed messages emanating from the Kremlin. The Russian president said he supports the Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris, while the Kremlin's extensive propaganda machine is very much behind Donald Trump. And of course, Donald Trump the other day in a rally said that, he contradicted himself. He said that Putin endorsed Kamala Harris, but he did it with a smile. Did he do that with a smile? He did that with a smile, didn't he? He was talking to, I don't know, some person, some senator that was just down there. The idea is that he's very well aware that Putin wasn't really endorsing Kamala Harris. And then he came out a couple of days later and said, how terrible it is that you've been endorsed by Putin. And then saying that actually, no, it was a proper endorsement, because obviously he was told that actually is more useful for us if you say that it was a genuine endorsement, because otherwise it looks like Putin wants you to win, and actually you might like that, but most of the electorate think that's bad. So Donald Trump's always thinking about himself and narcissistically how things look. And so to have another strong man endorse Kamala Harris, he doesn't want that to happen. He wants a strong man to endorse him. So he goes, he's only endorsed Kamala Harris as a kind of like as a bit of a chess move, and I think he talked about chess, part of the chess game then. because he really wants Putin to endorse him. But of course, everyone else around the world in his electorate, well, most other people are going to look at that and say, well, if Putin endorses you, that means you're liked by a dictator, and that's a bit weird. And so his initial reaction, Trump's initial reaction is to seek that endorsement from Putin, but then he corrects himself later, as his team around him, his strategy is like, don't do that, mate, you look like a tool. And that's reflected in his later correction of his actual correct position, which is that Putin was only doing that so that people would go and vote for Trump instead. Anyway, that's enough from me. Thanks for watching. It's a long one. I said it was going to be a long one. Tomorrow's Geopolitical one won't be, I hope. Take care. Speak soon.